as a nation, we're not saving enough into our pensions and we're not paying enough attention to performance, to risk and to fees. So there's still a long way to go for most people with this.
This episode is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Hello and welcome to the Investing Insiders podcast, where we help you achieve financial well-being by making smarter money decisions. I'm Brianne.
And I'm Antonia.
And in this episode, we'll be talking about what geopolitical tensions and all of the noise that you hear in the world could mean for your investments and what to do about it. Joining us today is Dan Boardman-Weston, Chief Executive Officer at BRI Wealth Management. Dan, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, both. Thank you very much for having me on.
So, Dan, this is a really interesting episode that we're looking forward to getting into. When thinking about investments and finances generally, you often hear about the links between what's going on in the wider world, and there's obviously a lot going on at the moment. So I guess before we kind of ease in, what are some of the things that people should think about before heading into investing for the first time?
Most people do invest, but they probably don't know they do. And a large part of that is thanks to auto enrollment, which came in about sort of 13, 14 years ago. And that's a very good way of investing because it just automatically happens. Now, it might not be going into the right investments or funds, but that's sort of quite a positive thing. I think ultimately you've got to think about what you're investing for. What is the purpose of the capital that you're setting aside? And then really you've got to think of other, important questions such as sort of the risk, your emotional tolerance to risk, your financial ability to take on risk, because investment does clearly come with risk. And I think ultimately a lot of that comes down to lack of financial education and people thinking it's really quite complicated. And weirdly enough, I was sort of having this conversation, it's going to make me sound terribly middle class, but with my cleaner last week. We were having a bit of a natter about stuff and life. What do you do? Yeah, work in financial services. He's like, I've always thought about investing. How do I do it? It's like, look, we could sort it out in the next 2 minutes. We'll download a really simple app for you. It will automatically take a certain amount of money when you get paid or do roundups and put you into some sort of bog standard funds and away you go. It doesn't have to be complicated, but I think there's such an educational gap that people think starting investing is a lot more complicated than it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, that's generally our experience as well when we're talking to people, is it's like this confidence issue. And do you find that people also feel that they need a certain amount of money to invest? Like people seem a bit unaware that you can literally start with a tenner.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think most people do think it's the reserve of the wealthy in society, and it's absolutely not. As you say, you can start with a £5 or a tenner. And I think the most important thing is just getting started, and it's building that habit of investing and saving. And the more you can do, because we're all human and some of us are good at saving and some are not, but the more you can do to reduce that friction of saving, the better, basically. So having these apps that automatically take money and round up is a really good way to start.
I mean, people often think that in order to invest, they need help as well. Like they need someone to do it for them. But it is accessible outside of that, don't you? So when someone approaches you, for example, at what point do you think people need to go and get advice and get someone to help them along that process?
I think it depends. I think if we sort of take somewhat of a step back, financial education is pretty woeful in this country. Whilst it's been on the curriculum for quite a few years, I think it's only taught in about a third of primary schools and 40% of secondary schools, and it's basically non-existent at most universities. So we're not setting up people to sort of understand some of these concepts about investing and to build that confidence. I think in terms of when someone needs to take advice, whilst it may only be a small amount of advice to start with, I think most people do need advice at the very start of their investing journey. What application should I download? What sort of fund do I need to be in? Talk me through risk. Talk me through whatever it is. Now, for a lot of people, that might only be 5 or 10 minutes of advice. It's not terribly complicated, but it's still advice. And at the moment, there are no sort of really good pathways for people to get that advice or for firms to sort of deliver that in a compliant and profitable manner. But regulation is changing, the world is changing. Hopefully that will become a bit easier. But I think for full-blown sort of financial planning and investment advice, you don't really need that when you're just starting off. I think typically we see with sort of financial planning hat on or investing hat on, that's typically at key junctures in life. Maybe you're sort of thinking about retiring in the next 5 or 10 years. Maybe you're coming into an inheritance. And that's where people may have had some confidence and knowledge with sort of the basics of investing, opening an ISA, but they're coming into sort of life-changing sums of money or big life events. And that's where they need more sort of rounded and significant financial investing advice.
So in your experience, at what sort of age are people starting to invest?
I think they're sort of typically starting to get a handle on it, maybe in their 30s. They're sort of starting to think about pensions or ISAs or the future. I think when they're typically coming to us and probably more broadly in the industry, it's probably late 40s, early 50s, around those key life events, thinking about retirement. Maybe, parents have passed away. So yeah, it's nowhere near as early as it should be. Yeah, I mean, look, everyone should know about compound interest being the eighth wonder of the world. The sooner you start investing, the easier it is because time is on your side. But yeah, it's typically not until the 30s or very sort of late 40s that people really start meaningfully engaging in the planning process.
I think that's like a really important thing to flag, especially in terms of starting early. One of the things that tends to be highlighted more, I'd say, just throughout life is the concept of saving. So it's like, make sure you put your money in a piggy bank or put some money away. And you kind of have that string of, okay, I'm putting money away for this thing. When it comes to investing, it does seem to feel like some people see it outside of what, their normal financial goals and aspirations are. So I guess it will be quite interesting to get your take on some of the, milestones and some of the goals that people can invest for, just to help them cement how it can work as a tool to grow their money and what it could help them fund.
Yeah, I mean, it's important with investing to have an appropriate time horizon. So, it's not investing in the stock market or in a fund might not be sensible if you're planning to save for a holiday in 6 months' time, because you might not want to take the risk that your investments have fallen 20% and you can't go to where you want it to go to. So you really sort of think for the investing portion of your money, probably thinking about goals that are maybe at least 3 years away, preferably sort of 5+ years away. That's what you'd typically say as a minimum for investing. And what could that be? That could be getting on the housing ladder. It could be, moving up the housing ladder. It could be for a whole host of reasons, a new car, a wedding, whatever it is. I think there's lots of different reasons people save and invest. And whilst it's, as we've talked, it's important to have that longer term savings pot that is invested and that it's hopefully going to grow over time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that for those sort of shorter term savings, that holiday in 6 months, the wedding in 18 months, whatever it is, that you're not, even though that should stay in cash, that you're not sort of maximizing the return on that cash and not sort of proactively using those sort of same tips and tricks to save money for those shorter term goals. And again, the financial sort of ecosystem has come on leaps and bounds in the last 10 years, and it has never been easier to start investing in the stock market or to actually just start saving in cash towards shorter term objectives.
So if somebody is just starting investing, often one of the tripping points is even on those apps where you've only got sort of like a handful of options, they're often asked about what sort of risk they want to take on. How do you help people with that?
It's a really interesting topic, which I could bore you about for hours about risk. But it's a Monday afternoon, and I'm sure you've got other things you want to be getting on with. Risk means different things to different people and at different points in life. Risk over the long term, is arguably your money not keeping up with inflation. And arguably to mitigate that risk, you need quite a lot in equities to do that. But actually, that's the most risky thing in the short term because equities are very volatile, as we're seeing today with what's happening in Iran. The stock market's down 1.5%, oil's up massively, lots of sort of movement. That's really risky in the short term, but over the long term, it's less risky. But I think often what we find is that people get a bit confused with attitude to sort of risk and what risk they either can afford to take or should be taking. And typically, if you're younger, you should be in a more adventurous investment portfolio or risky investment. And that doesn't mean, you're putting it all on Lucky Jim at 2:10 at Cheltenham. But it means just having a higher equity content. And then typically, as you get older, maybe you don't want to take as much risk because you need to rely on that money in the sort of short to medium term to fund your retirement. But often we will see people that are on the younger side of things earn well, can afford to take investment risk, but they will say, no, I'm cautious. And they might think they are cautious or should be cautious, or they have a cautious approach to finances in life. But that doesn't necessarily mean they shouldn't be taking more risk with their investments or their pension. Pension's a classic example. I'm in my early 30s. I can't touch my pension for probably 30 odd years by the time I get there. I should be taking pretty much as much equity risk as possible, because that is going to have the best chance of growing over the long term. And actually, if the market falls, I'm still contributing into my pension and I'm buying it cheaper. But most people are in the bog standard default middle of the road risk rating.
Yeah, I mean, we've just done a bunch of research into pension fund performance, and the difference was staggering. And a lot of people, I think, are in the wrong risk rating, and people are just shoved into these default funds. So auto enrollment, great for getting everyone into investing their pension, but really bad at getting everyone engaging in it. And the outcomes from people who engage in it to the people who don't can be wildly different. But again, that goes back to your point earlier about financial education being so lacking in this country. So what would you say to a parent now who is worried about the lack of financial education? Because we haven't plugged that gap at the moment. I mean, there's all this talk about it. But if you've got kids now who are teenagers or, whatever, what would you say?
I think, whilst I'm not familiar with all of them, I think that, the resources that are available online, especially now, are pretty substantial. So trying to get children interested, engaged in that, and sort of maybe looking at those resources and taking advantage of them. But I think it's a good question, and it's a tricky one, but somehow trying to get children engaged and interested in the concept of saving and learning those valuable financial lessons. So for whatever that's for, I suspect for some teenagers, they want, the latest pair of trainers or an Xbox or just and not just sort of saying, well, you're going to get that for Christmas. It could be, well, look, I'm going to give you £5 a week or whatever, and you've got to save that and invest that and sort of look after it yourself. But I think it's a tricky one, because even for adults, they don't want to engage necessarily in finance and investing and saving. And so trying to make that interesting and exciting for teenagers is probably quite an ask, unless it is mandated via the education system.
Yeah, that's the issue, is it's getting them interested. I mean, they'll barely talk to parents as it is, let alone about finance.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, it kind of raises quite an interesting point, particularly about education and building that confidence. One of the things that I suppose having that confidence helps you navigate is the idea of risk and when things outside of your control affect the market. So as you touched upon earlier, the conflict going on in the Middle East right now, and there's always something outside of your control that's going to impact the market and potentially the value of your investments. What tips do you give to people in terms of weathering those storms and waiting for their, assets to recover, or potentially making moves? Like, how do you stop people from panicking in those moments?
It's difficult because we are all human, and we can let emotions get the better of us in lots of different ways in life. The first thing is, again, a lot of this comes down to education, but trying to let people know that uncertainty and volatility is just a core part of investing. It is going to happen. If you look at the countless times over the last 30, 40 years where the market has fallen substantially, I mean, there's loads of times, crash in 87, falling out of ERM in 92, long-term capital management 97, .com 99, 2000, 2007 financial crisis, Eurozone crisis, Brexit, blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on and on. So trying to accept that volatility is just going to happen is key in educating that markets typically do tend to recover. That may take some time. I think diversification is key as well. And I think often that gets lost in today's market. It started to change a bit, but if I think most people and what they're familiar with and how they may start their investing journey, a lot of it is pointed towards US equity investments. And if you see all of these influencers on, TikTok or wherever, it's always put it in the S&P, put it in the FTSE world. And I don't think that gives people sufficient diversification for a whole host of reasons I won't bore you with. So just making sure you've not got all of your eggs in one basket, I think, is key. And I think also making sure that you're not investing too much. So if you are, if the markets do fall over a short period of time, that you're not having to sell down investments to live off or to meet that goal that you're saving for, that you've got sufficient headroom that actually you're not a forced seller at, probably what is the worst point to be selling. But I think ultimately volatility is going to happen and people need to accept that and try and view it as an opportunity depending on what stage of life you're at. If the markets were to fall 20 or 25% over the next couple of months, then, people contributing to their pensions and not needing to take them anytime soon should be somewhat jumping for joy and saying my pension contributions are going to go much further and I can get more bang for my buck.
This episode of the Investing Insiders podcast is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Saxo provides access to a broad range of global assets through a sophisticated trading platform. You can trade US stocks from as little as $1 per trade and UK stocks from $3 per trade. Please remember that all investing involves risk. The value of your investments can go down as well as up, and you could get back less than you invest. Terms and conditions apply. Visit Saxo Markets to learn more.
For someone who has taken that sort of TikTok advice and stuck all their money into the S&P 500 and they're listening to this right now and going, oh, damn, am I in the wrong thing? What do you think they should be doing to diversify?
It depends on the approach you take. There are lots of different ways you can invest and lots of companies that will offer sort of diversified portfolios. So you just go and invest in Portfolio 3 or Portfolio Adventurous, whatever it's called, and they will sort of do that diversification for you. So that's probably the easiest route. However, if you are just in the S&P or FTSE World, whatever it is, and you want to sort of do this yourself, then just look at other geographical areas. The UK stock market has done well recently, but it's still quite cheap. Europe, emerging markets, Asia. It is not just the US that is the place to invest. And, there's countless geographies and sectors that people should be having a look at alongside the US.
So you think there's opportunity in the UK stock market at the moment?
I do. I mean, we've been bullish on the UK for a few years now and probably a bit too early. But yes, the UK market is trading a little bit below its long-term sort of valuation. So it's a little bit cheap at the moment. And actually, we've got some great companies. And again, people don't necessarily know this, but if you look at the FTSE 100, 70% of the revenues of the FTSE 100 do not come from the UK. They come from overseas. So actually, the FTSE 100 is a lot of overseas companies. But a lot of them are cheap and a lot of them are very good quality. And actually, with all of the concerns that we've seen, especially over the last few months with technology in America and valuations and geopolitical uncertainty, sometimes people want boring old world stocks, whether that's alcohol companies, tobacco, banks, miners, all of these things which have been out of vogue for quite some time. Suddenly people want exposure to them. And I think that's quite a good place to be.
It sounds like it's a very transitory process. I think sometimes when people think about investing or finances, generally, there's this idea that it's very stagnant and stuck. So if something is going well, it's going to go well forever. Or if it's going badly, it's going to go badly forever. Whereas there are these cycles and trends and things to look at. I think one of the interesting things that you've touched upon is pensions and having that sort of long-term foresight when it comes to building a retirement pot. I guess from your experience and some of the sort of reports and stuff that you've seen, how prepared are we as a nation when it comes to pension saving?
Oh, we're not really prepared at all. I mean, is the brutal answer. I think, as you said a little while ago, Anthony, auto enrollment's been been great for people to be contributing into a pension, but they're probably contributing into the wrong thing and they're probably not contributing the right amount. And I think, I was looking at this the other day. I think there are about 3-ish million lost pension pots in the UK with a combined value of about 30-ish billion. So an average of 10,000. And the trouble is with people now do not stay in jobs for life. They probably move jobs every 5 or 6 years and they just accumulate all of these pensions, don't know what they're invested, don't know where they are, and don't know how much they should be saving into the pension. So I think auto-enrollment has been really good at getting people to invest and to save. But as a nation, we're not saving enough into our pensions and we're not paying enough attention to performance, to risk and to fees. So there's still a long way to go for most people with this.
Yeah, that's exactly our experience when we're speaking to people. And some of this actually ties in with the whole education element again, because I put a video out on TikTok over the weekend about NHS pensions, just explaining it to them. And a lot of the comments on that was from NHS staff who had no idea how their pension was operating, how valuable it was. One comment from a NHS staff who said, I've been with the NHS for 30 years. I opted out of my pension when I started. And I was like, oh no, that's such a failure of our system that someone didn't realise what they were opting out of. So yeah, auto-enrollment, great, but without that educational component, we're still not getting the most out. We're not squeezing the most out of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think this is going to get worse and worse. I think if you go back in time, most people would be on a defined benefit style scheme, which is sort of fine. You don't really have any risk in terms of having to save the right amount or, think about that. You just get an income for life. But I think for people probably in their 30s, maybe in their 40s, and definitely younger than that, I would not be betting that we will be getting a state pension in 20 or 30 years' time, or a state pension to the generosity that it maybe is at the moment. And so this is going to become more and more important, that people need to understand what is in their pensions and take more responsibility themselves. Because otherwise, people are going to get to the time they retire and they're just not going to have enough saved, and they may not be able to rely on the state for support. But I think, in my mind, so much of this rests with financial education, and we need to crack that nut before we can really solve anything else. Otherwise, we're just storing up issues for decades and decades, and society is going to be a lot poorer, actually and metaphorically, for it.
Yeah, the Labour Party announced that they were going to work on financial education. I think it was a couple of months ago or something. But looking through what they were announcing, there wasn't actually very much on investing. In fact, there was nothing, I don't think, really on investing. It was more about, just managing your finances in quite a basic way. So it felt like there was a real gap in it, because we're so far behind a lot of other countries when it comes to this. And they're doing better and they're investing in their own economies. And in the UK, we're just sort of scrabbling behind and people aren't realising. And then they're going into retirement unprepared and underfunded. And that sort of triple lock is looking more and more volatile at the moment, or unsustainable. So it's such a shame that we haven't managed to get on top of this yet, and we've missed all these years where people should have been saving a lot better.
Yeah, and it's compounded in my mind by I think it's about 9 or 10% of people in the UK receive financial planning advice. So actually, people then are in a sort of an uninformed position about finances, and then aren't seeking out advice, either because they don't think they need it or they don't know how to get access to it, and it sort of compounds the issue. But I think going right back on the education piece, it's meant to have been on the curriculum for a long time. Yep, credit to Labour for trying to, make some improvements here. But ultimately, who's going to be delivering this education? Teachers are already completely stretched with not enough resource and so many other issues going on within the education system. But also, to be frank, they probably are not clued up on personal finance. So we're expecting them to go and teach personal finance when they probably don't know that much about it and they're busy dealing with a whole host of other issues. The system is not going to work.
Yeah, no, you're bang on there. I know quite a few teachers and I know what their financial knowledge is like, and it's pretty much zero. So you're asking, is the blind leading the blind in a way? So I couldn't agree more with that.
I suppose for people who are thinking about whether or not they should be taking financial advice, what types of questions should they be asking themselves, either before looking for someone or actually just taking the plunge and saying, you know what, I've got a knowledge gap, let me actually consult an expert?
I think for me, it's not necessarily about sort of the questions they need to ask beforehand, but most financial planners or advisors, if you did go down that route, will do an initial meeting or initial few meetings for free. And they will probably be able to tease out sort of the most important things to you and the questions that you sort of need to be asking yourself or getting someone to answer. So really, I would just encourage people to reach out to experts and have a chat with them. And it might be that you want to engage with them. It might be you think you can do it yourself after that initial chat, which is absolutely fine. But seek advice. Even if you think you don't need advice, you probably do. I mean, a lot of our clients as a business are business owners, high net worth individuals, directors, professionals, really switched on, amazing people at doing what they do. But they come to us because they are either time poor or knowledge poor or both. And they're amazing at running their businesses, but they're clueless when it comes to personal finance. So it's not, yeah.
Dan, is there a barrier to entry for some people in terms of the cost?
I think there can be, but this is what the FCA is trying to sort out with the advice guidance boundary review. And banks and other sort of companies are trying to make it easier for the sort of mass affluent and sort of younger people to get generic advice, to sort of access rather to generic advice that is probably likely to be suitable for someone in their sort of broad set of circumstances, rather being uber specific and bespoke, which, a lot of financial advice is now. So we're definitely moving in the right direction, and the government's going to be spending a lot of money on and sort of investing campaigns. I think there's going to be a squirrel in there. That's exciting, isn't it? So we're moving in the right direction, but it's going to take time, and whether it will be enough to really start giving people getting people the right outcomes remains to be seen.
I mean, I released a video this weekend about the ability to take money out of your pension before you retire in order to pay for advice. And you can take, I think it's up to 1,500 on 3 separate occasions to pay for advice. It's only through some providers. But little things like that, people are really unaware of. So, those sort of bits of structure are there for people to take advantage of. But if you don't know about it, then you can't. And how important is it when you're about to retire to take your pension in the right way? I mean, that can change your outcomes quite significantly, can't it?
Oh, a huge amount. And look, I'm not a financial planner by trade. My background was very much on the investment side, but now I sort of CEO of a sort of wealth management business. So I'm sort of a layman's planner. I sort of have a very basic understanding of it. But even I don't understand some of the complexities to do with pensions. I mean, and it is so complicated. So people do need to be taking advice, especially around how they access their pensions when they get to that stage of life, and the most tax efficient way to do it. And the amount of times we hear people say, "Oh, I'm going to take my max tax-free cash," and in some circumstances that could be absolutely the right advice. That could be super. In others, it could be atrocious. But it depends on people's situations.
Yeah, exactly. Just out of interest, Dan, when did you first start investing?
So I joined BRI when I was 18, so straight out of school.
Wow. So straight after your A-levels? Okay.
So I left school. I was having a gap year because I wanted to go traveling, and so needed some pocket money. Got an internship at BRI for 3 months or so. After about 3 months, my boss at the time said to me, do you want a job? Do you want to stay on the investment side of things? And I thought long and hard about it. And I thought, yes, I want a good career. I quite like investing, want to sort of crack on with life and career. And then sort of really never looked back. So I stayed with BRI until I was 23, very much on the investment side. Then went away to do an MBA at Warwick Business School full-time for a year. Then rejoined BRI in 2018 and then sort of more investment, and then took over as CEO a few years ago. So the answer to your original question is I started investing when I was 18 and never looked back.
That's amazing. I mean, because one of the things that we try and drum into people is that your greatest asset is time. But very few people are going to start investing at 18. So your plans to travel have been shelved.
I'm still waiting to travel.
Still waiting. You have to do it in your retirement. You'll be well stacked. You can do it in comfort when you retire. That's really interesting. So when you first started investing at that point, did you just sort of take a punt at it? Or because, you didn't have that financial education.
No, I didn't. I was in a more privileged position than others because I was working in an investment firm. So I'm doing my professional exams, so sort of learning all about that. But it's classic as sort of do as I say, not as I do. So yeah, when I first started investing, I would be putting money into spivvy little tiny penny shares and, thinking I was the next Warren Buffett. But ultimately, and you think you can get rich quickly, you just think you can do it and you can't. You get rich slowly, and you get rich slowly by investing on a regular fashion and letting compound interest take its, do the heavy lifting for you. So yeah, my approach to investing is markedly different now to what it was when I was 18.
I bet it is. So one of the questions that we get asked quite a lot is, should I invest with dollar cost averaging, which is drip feeding your money into the market every month? I'm just explaining it for listeners, not for you, Dan. You obviously know that. Or do I invest it in a lump sum? What would you say to someone like that?
I would typically say drip feed it. If you're doing sort of regular contributions out of your salary, you're putting £1,000 a month aside, I would drip feed that. I think if you've got a more material sum of money, either from inheritance or whatever the sources of it are, I probably would drip feed it, but maybe put a quarter in this month and a quarter in, the next month, and just sort of be a little bit more aggressive with the drip feeding. But ultimately, again, say you've got £20,000 set aside that you think, right, I'm going to invest this. It could be that you think, right, with what's going on in Iran, the stock market has fallen quite a lot. I'm going to put quite a bit to work in the stock market now. So again, I think it depends on the circumstances, but generally speaking, we would recommend to drip feed it in over a period of time.
And I talk to a lot of parents who are saving for their kids into junior ISAs. And obviously in that situation, time is really on your side. So in that kind of situation, would you say that you're okay just to plonk it all into a couple of tracker funds, or would you still say that you need that diversification? Because if the volatility doesn't need to be such a concern then.
Exactly. I think often with investing, we can all sort of overcomplicate things, and there's a lot to be said for just keeping it simple. So yeah, go and buy a tracker or a couple of different trackers or a ready-made portfolio and just ignore it, leave it, sort of forget about it to a certain extent. And probably if you are putting some money into a junior ISA for a child, there's a long time before they can sort of touch that or may need to touch that. So probably don't even drip feed it, just put it in, and you might get the top of the market, but markets recover. So I wouldn't fret about it too much. I think the main thing is getting it invested, not trying to be too clever with timing. But I think one other thing that I just want to sort of touch on, which is something that I sort of thought about quite a bit a few years ago, and I see the Americans have done it, but I think could make a real difference in this country. And that's the idea of a birth dividend, where the state would, in essence, pay a sum of money for every child that's born in the UK. I believe there's about 700,000 births a year in the UK, give or take. So if this was to happen and the state was to put £1,000 into an account for each child that's born, that would cost about £700 million each year. So a lot of money, but not mega in the grand scheme of us spending well over £1 trillion a year. And if we were to assume, which is a bit of a stretch on the assumptions, but that investment was to grow 10% a year. So we just put the £1,000 in on day one, nothing else, and we assume it grows 10% a year. And then we let someone touch that when by the time they're 65, you can't touch it in your life, but you can touch it when you're 65. That £1,000 would have grown to about £445,000.
So a pension, basically.
In essence, yes, a sort of pension. But I think then everyone in the country would have something that they could look at and sort of hopefully spark an interest in investing. You know, you'd see you've got your birth dividend, your birth pension, whatever you want to call it, which may sort of help with financial education and the interest in this. But yeah, you could grow it to many hundreds of thousands of pounds from an initial £1,000 investment. Why wouldn't you do it? And it's going to take pressure off the state in the future and for a relatively small sum of money each year. I just think it's a no-brainer.
It's really interesting because it's a bit like child trust funds, I guess, but much better managed and, spanning a longer time in life. So with child trust funds, children born between a certain age were given, was it £250? And then
250, yeah. But it was really badly managed.
Yeah. And then it's just kind of by the time you're 18, you can cash it in if you wanted to, if it had grown at all. And then there wasn't really much education behind what you could do with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is it all has to be managed quite well, doesn't it? Because those child trust funds, I mean, they're all maturing at the moment. I know lots of kids that kind of age, and some of them are actually coming out with £250. And I'm like, how has it not grown? And some of them literally didn't. They didn't grow at all because they were just spiffed on the wrong stuff.
Yeah, it's shocking because, I don't know, but that £250 probably should have grown over 18 years to, I don't know, 1,000, maybe a bit more.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, when you're investing with kids, actually showing them the investments is a really good educational tool because there's nothing quite like learning by doing. You could sit kids down in a classroom and talk to them about finance until they completely glaze over. But we have junior ISAs for our kids, and I show them their junior ISAs on a regular basis and explain what they're invested in, and they can watch it grow. I mean, I showed my son his junior ISA last week, just before the tensions all kicked off, and he'll be getting another look when he gets back from school tonight, so he can see the dip, and then I'll show him the recovery from the dip. And that's the perfect way to learn about how that market volatility goes. But, don't panic. You just sit there, don't sell, and wait it out. And it's a real shame that the child trust fund thing was mismanaged for a start and also wasn't used as part of their education, because it feels like we really missed a trick there.
Yeah, wasted opportunity completely. So yeah, I think a birth dividend, sort of a twist on the child trust fund, I think would be a cheap and sensible policy for a government to come up with.
When did they launch that in the US? Is that quite a recent thing?
I think it's in the last year or so, and I think, you're testing me now. I think it was Michael Dell of Dell Computers that maybe funded this or started it off. But I did some work on it about 2 or 3 years ago, and I just thought it was a sensible idea. So it's pleasing the Americans have copied me.
Well done. Is it invested in US equity?
I think it is, yeah.
Okay, so we could use this would possibly be another way of investing in our own economy as well.
Well, exactly. And it sort of ties in with what Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer want to do in terms of more money going into the UK economy. So it's not just the sort of benefits of people having a lump of money when they get to 65. There's education benefits. There's sort of wider economic benefits. It's, it's multifaceted. Why I think this would be sensible.
Yeah, it's all about managing it properly, presumably.
Yes, that would be key. But I'm sure the government would be up to the task.
Yeah. Well, we'll see about that. Yeah. I know a lot of people are turning to AI to help with investing now. What are your views on that?
I think AI is evolving very quickly. I think for me, there is a big fear about AI hallucinating. And I've seen some sort of shocking things of people asking for investment advice and it just sort of getting basic things sort of completely wrong. So I think you can't rely on what comes out of an AI engine to be gospel. I think AI has definitely got a role to play in helping people at the start of their investing journey, maybe, and for bringing down the cost of advice for that sort of mass market element. I think if I look at it from a financial planning perspective, we're starting to use it a bit in our business, really to increase the amount of clients that we can look after without having to take on lots more headcount. So it's hopefully going to make us more efficient. But I think for the demographic of clients that a lot of wealth managers serve, and that especially we serve, is when you're getting to key points in your life, talked about earlier, that sort of thinking about retirement in 5 years, or you're coming into some inheritance, or whatever it is, I think people still value face-to-face advice with someone that they can know and trust. And I personally do not think AI will massively disrupt that end of the market. I think it will augment it and make it a better experience for clients and more efficient.
So you think the wealth management market is going to stay strong moving on? I mean, I know a lot of people are looking for jobs moving forward. You know, there's all this youth unemployment at the moment, and people are wondering what sort of sectors are going to remain strong in the future. And so for youth looking at entering into the wealth management sphere, you reckon it's still a strong area?
Yes, I do. And I'd go back to that point that only 9% of people in the UK receive financial advice. There are a lot of tailwinds that are going to be positive for this sector. What I would caveat, though, is I don't know how that career journey is going to look going forward. If I think about it sort of with a BRI hat on now, often we will take people on out of uni or out of school, and they might be administrators within the business. They'll be sort of processing the business and doing a lot of the administrative tasks. And then after a few years and a few exams, they might become a paraplanner. So they start writing some of the more technical reports and pieces of advice. They might start going to the odd client meeting with a financial planner and sort of learning that way. Then they'll do 2 or 3 years of that, and then they'll become a junior planner and sort of off they go, hurrah. However, if I look at how AI is changing the wealth management industry, and AI and automation, I should say, it's making admin a lot more slick and improved and doing a lot of the heavy work there. And it's starting to do a lot of the heavy work with paraplanning as well, not for really complex things, but more of the basic things. So the bit I'm unsure about is how the career pathway to becoming a financial planner will evolve in the future, and whether it will still be that progression for youngsters in the future.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's those entry-level roles which are being increasingly sort of put at risk. That's super interesting, because I know that this is a hot topic at the moment, and a lot of people are wondering how they're going to enter into that sphere, and you know, the sort of routes to take. So then education becomes a lot more critical, so that you can skip the admin part and come in at a later stage.
It completely does. But I think, again, there's another we were just talking about education, really, which is quite interesting. But another education piece that we need to get better at as a sector is that most people don't know what a wealth manager is, or that a financial planner exists. And I do quite a bit at Warwick University, so doing some speaking there and helping students out. And you speak to most people, and it's Warwick Business School, so they're sort of all somewhat financially orientated. Every man or woman and their dog wants to be like an investment banker, or this or that or the other. They don't really know what that means. It just sounds really good, doesn't it? It sounds sexy. I'm an investment banker. But no one ever comes to me and says, I want to be a financial planner or a wealth manager or a career paraplanner. And again, as a sector, we need to get better at demonstrating that, actually, guys, this is a really good sector to be involved with, but people just don't really know about it.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We did take a little bit of a left turn there. Which is just got really interesting about all of that. So
I think it all marries together though, doesn't it? I think, the education part and raising awareness of what is available to help people with their finances. And for those, early career starters, things that they can move into, whether it's through formal education or, going down a more vocational route. There's lots to kind of be unearthed in the wealth management space. I think we've covered so many different areas and really touched upon the importance of investing, pensions for the long term. Dan, it would be great to hear kind of one nugget of investment wisdom that you wish everybody knew and could kind of get started with after listening to this episode.
I think the key thing with investing is it's about behavior and not necessarily about being brilliant. It's about getting into the habit of doing it and starting and showing somewhat of an interest. I think ultimately that is the key thing that will make the most difference to your listeners' lives. It's just getting into the habit of investing and then slowly starting to try and build up that knowledge or interest and asking those sort of pertinent questions to, planners or on the internet and showing an interest. But yeah, just get into that habit of saving. It is so, so important.
All right. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time. This has been a really insightful episode and I think really valuable, especially to dig into the educational side of things. I think sometimes when you don't necessarily have that built into your learning from the past, it can feel quite overwhelming, but it's great to hear that there's so many options out there that listeners can dig into.
No, well, good. I thank you both very much for having me on. It's been very enjoyable to speak to you both.
Thank you so much for joining our Investing Insiders podcast. If you like the episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on your platform of choice. For the latest money news and deals, you can sign up to our weekly newsletter at investinginsiders.co.uk/newsletter-page. We've also got a suite of guides, tools, and calculators on our website at investinginsiders.co.uk. You can also keep up to date with us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.